Hey guys! Tonight we glide through Constantinople's alleys of wax and gossip, where candlelight meant more than illumination and white was never just white. It's late, and you're walking the cobbled streets of Constantinople. The year is 907, or maybe 94, historians can't agree. Either way, the air smells faintly of roasted garlic, sea salt, and beeswax. Somewhere a donkey brays like it's been wronged. You duck beneath a faded awning as a breeze lifts a sheet of linen dyed with indigo so deep it looks like night stitched into fabric. Candles glow from every window, not lamplight. Candles. Some flicker with a buttery hue. Others burn almost bluish white. Suspiciously pristine, you notice a man scowling at a window display, muttering to himself. His name is Theoklitos, and he's a candle maker. But not just any candle maker, he is a whitening wax artisan, which is apparently different from a scented wax pourer, who is definitely different from a temple taper spinner. Yes, that's how deep this rabbit hole goes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to post your location and local time. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow Theoklitos into a cramped shop. Its shelves lined with wax bricks, some pale like ivory, others yellowed like old teeth. Here, in this unassuming little corner of the Byzantine world, whiteness is currency, not in the philosophical or troubling modern sense, but in the very literal sense. How white can your candle be without it turning to mush or catching fire in a gust? See, Constantinople's elite didn't just want light, they wanted pure light. Light that wouldn't disrupt prayers. Light that reflected God's perfection. Light that wouldn't make the gold leaf on a mosaic look dingy. And yet, candles weren't all equal. Those made of beeswax, holy tallow, useful for scaring rats, fish oil tapers, only if you hate yourself and your nostrils. But even beeswax had its shades, its imperfections. And so, the Byzantine obsession began, the race to make the whitest wax. You watch as Theoklitos unwraps a brick of wax from Egypt. It's been sun-bleached in the dry air, filtered through linen, then shipped wrapped in fig leaves and goat hide. He taps it like a melon and grunts in disappointment. Too soft, he mutters. Too yellow. There's a chart pinned to the wall, hand-painted with candle samples. It's not unlike a paint store display eggshell. Cloud, alabaster, snowdrop. Except here, the shades have names like Holy Radiance, Bishop's Cheek, and near but not quite lamb, the Byzantine Empire. You realize, didn't joke around with spiritual aesthetics. If a candle burned too orange in the great church, it could be seen as an omen. Not a major one, but just enough to warrant a full council meeting. The emperor didn't need his dinner interrupted by a bishop panicking over burnt sienna shadows. And this isn't some quirky footnote in history. It affected trade. Merchants started importing whitening powders from Persia, some made of chalk, some suspiciously radioactive. Though they didn't know that yet, others used clay from the Nile, ground into dust and folded into hot wax like a baker folding egg whites into batter. Historians still argue whether these whitening techniques actually made the candles burn cleaner, or whether it was all just vibes. One papyrus scroll describes a court eunuch whispering complaints about the mildly ochre hue of Princess Theophanos' wedding candles. The scandal was hushed up, but the record survives in the margins of a hymn book, doodled beside a drawing of a goat sneezing. You continue walking the alleys. Every few blocks, another shop competes to be the most divine glow. One claims to use only milk-fed bees. Another boasts wax spun under full moons. A third simply says, white enough for the virgin. There's something oddly soothing about it all. These ancient people, caught in the web of empire, theology, and trade, still found time to care deeply, hilariously, about the exact shade of a candle. And as you round the corner past an alley filled with molting pigeons and a cat with one eye, you wonder, did it even matter? Maybe not. But then again, maybe everything mattered in Byzantium. Every stitch, every tile, every whisper of smoke from a sacred flame. After all, if light itself was sacred, wasn't the purity of that light a holy pursuit? And just like that, you've slipped into their world. A world where politics and prayer wavered like candlelight, where the color almost white could start a feud, where wax wasn't just wax, it was a mirror to the divine. You follow Theoklitos as he steps back from his disappointing Egyptian wax and pulls down a battered wooden crate from the top shelf. It creaks ominously, like it's about to spill a dozen ghosts or worse. Counterfeit tapers. Instead, he opens it to reveal chunks of hardened wax the color of chilled cream. This, he announces proudly, is Illyrian bleached stock, sun-treated over 57 days, rotated twice daily, and covered every other evening with linen soaked in lemon water and goat milk. Why goat milk? He shrugs. Keeps the devil out. You're not sure if he means that literally, but you nod along as he carefully cuts a sliver with a blade that's definitely seen better centuries. He squints at the slice under lamplight. Too warm, he mutters. Still too warm. This is how it went in the candle guilds. You imagine a row of artisans leaning over samples like snobby sommeliers? Yes, I detect a hint of poultry undertone. Perhaps winter-fed bees. Some of them even claimed they could hear the purity of wax as it cooled. One guild master allegedly banned all apprentices who had ever used olive oil soap, claiming it corrupted their olfactory balance. The obsession wasn't just artistic, it was commercial. Whiter candles fetched higher prices, particularly among the clergy. Churches competed, just like cathedrals do today with pipe organs or bell towers, to host the cleanest burning, most ethereal tapers during services. There were bribes, there were forgeries, there were heated debates about the moral implications of bleaching wax with ash from burnt relics. Yes, that happened. A now-lost letter from a monk named Procopios describes the scandal of the charred knuckle, where someone in Thessaloniki ground a relic bone reputedly from St. Polycarp into a whitening powder and sold it as divine brightener. The bishop allegedly fainted. You duck into another shop, smaller this time. A woman in her 40s, missing 2 fingers and proud of it, is stirring wax in a double boiler. Not that she calls it that. She just calls it the pot. Her name is Melania, and she was once fined 12 silver coins for making wax that flickered suspiciously. She lifts the lid and explains her process. Boil the wax 3 times, each time with a different herb lavender, thyme, and finally, crushed bay leaves. Then filter through sheep's wool for the creamy topcoat effect. Historians still argue whether Melania's method actually did anything at all. Some say her herbs reacted with the proteins in the wool. Others think it was placebo marketing for aristocrats with too much money and too few hobbies. One scholar even suggested it was all part of a side hustle to smuggle medicinal herbs under the cover of candle supplies. You lean in to smell the mixture. It's surprisingly pleasant, like a medieval spa on fire. Now, as the wax cools into molds shaped like stubby horns, Melania shows you her color chart. It's not on parchment but carved into wood. A dozen little wax tiles ranging from river foam to pale grief. She explains each with deep seriousness, including regret. A grayish cream used during fasting season. Not white, but almost just enough to make the monks feel guilty. You blink slowly, cozy now, and glance around at the racks of finished candles. Some are wrapped in soft linen, others in reused onion skins for protection. They sit like tiny ivory towers, waiting to be judged. And that's the truth of it. These people weren't just melting wax. They were perfecting emotion in flame. Each candle told a story not just through light, but through tone, texture, scent, and the endless pursuit of the mythical perfect white. But here's the twist. No one agreed on what that perfect white actually was. One guild swore by bone-hued, another pushed snowborn ivory. A rogue chandler in Nicaea declared his wax as pale as St. Mary's laughter. That last one got him punched, possibly excommunicated. But his sample still survives tucked in the binding of a forgotten tax ledger, analyzed in the 1980s by an enthusiast with too much access to candle archives. You meander past a storefront window where candles are labeled with prices, and you can't help but notice the most expensive ones are almost indistinguishable from the mid-priced ones. A difference in hue so subtle, you wonder if it's real or if the label is what sells it. Byzantine marketing. 300% markup for a candle that glows slightly less anxious. Suddenly, a bell rings across the alley. Not a church bell, but the signal for evening prayer. You step outside, and the city glows. Candles flicker in windows, lining doorways and courtyards. The streets take on a golden hue, some edges tinged with pink, others with blue-white. That's when you notice it, the inconsistency. No two candles are quite the same. Even among the so-called holy whites, some lean warm, some cold, some practically beige, and yet, in that collective glow, the whole city feels intentional, like everyone's imperfection is lighting the empire in harmony. You glance up at the Hagia Sophia. At this hour, the great dome becomes a kind of silhouette, with a faint, ghostly glow from within, candles burning in rituals so old, even the priests have forgotten why they started. And somewhere behind you, Theoclidos curses softly as he scrapes another wax block that just isn't white enough. You trudge a little farther into the wax-scented evening, feet echoing softly over worn flagstones polished smooth by 1,000 years of sandals, goat hooves, and impatient market carts. The air is thick now with smoke, but a good kind, if that's possible. Not the choking soot of charcoal fires or tallow flames, but the gentle, clean breath of beeswax, olive oil, and burning rosemary. In this part of Constantinople, it's just how things smell. You find yourself drawn into the wax quarter, though no one calls it that officially. Too lowbrow for records, too essential for obscurity. Here, the walls glisten with residual sheen from centuries of splattered wax, and the shadows wobble gently as if alive, playing off candle displays that haven't been dusted in ever. A man with a greasy cap waves you into his shop, introducing himself only as Cosmos, and you don't ask for more. He's bent-backed from years of stirring vats and wears a sash darkened by mysterious stains. He offers you a stool shaped like an overturned bucket, and begins explaining the great and often overlooked connection between olive harvests, religious taxes, and high-end candle purity. Apparently, in the Byzantine taxation system, a portion of olive oil from certain provinces could be paid in kind. If you couldn't afford the full coin quota, you offered oil often pressed fresh, sometimes suspiciously old. This olive oil didn't just go into kitchens and lamp basins. No, it also found its way into candle laboratories, makeshift little rooms where artisan monks and self-proclaimed light sculptors experimented with combining animal fats, wax, and oil to perfect burn rates and textures. Some even claimed olive oil purified the spiritual tone of the flame. One pamphlet, now lost, but referenced by a bored monk in a marginalia sketch of a chicken wearing boots, suggests a direct link between the holiness of an olive grove and how bright the resulting wax would burn in sacred space. The brighter the candle, the more devout the grove. Logical, obviously, but there was a dark side to this fragrant barter system. Lower quality oil was often padded out with fish guts or rancid tallow, something you might call budget-tier combustion. These products were technically still burnable, but not exactly desirable. Cosmos describes one shipment of oil from the western provinces that turned every candle it touched into a smell bomb that forced an entire Vespers service outdoors. He laughs about it now, but you sense a small part of him still twitches at the memory. You take a slow breath. The shop smells complicated. A mixture of roasted bay leaf, salted meat, and waxy dust, somehow comforting. Cosmos leads you to a back room filled with old ledgers, payment logs, he says, but really, they're a record of what was most precious and problematic in the Byzantine wax world. You run your fingers down a curling page, reading entries like 2 bricks Illyrian bleached, rejected, too soft, tallow barrel, goat source, southern hills, pungent, burned green, olive quota diverted to candle office by bishop's cousin, purity debated. Historians still argue whether this candle office was a real government bureau or a nickname for a group of very bored monks tasked with sniff-testing candle shipments. Some say it was unofficial. Others believe there's a secret imperial edict establishing it. No records survive, just jokes and burn marks. As you lean over a dusty counter, Cosmos points to a hardened lump of wax in a small clay bowl. It's off-white, definitely not holy white, but still quite lovely in a sort of ancient sour cream way. That one, he says proudly, was made with oxen bladder casing filters. You blink. Yes, oxen bladders. Apparently, when boiled and stretched thin, these made excellent wax strainers, capable of pulling out even the tiniest impurities. Fringe historians, yes, those exist, argue this method might have been imported from Slavic traders who specialized in sausage-making tools. There's even a faint theory, mostly ridiculed in academic circles, that a single ox bladder candle burned in a side chapel during a coronation once gave off a glow described as like dawn on polished marble. No one can prove it, but the anecdote survives, wedged in the margin of a treatise on ecclesiastical vestments. You're beginning to see the Byzantine world as it truly was. Dazzlingly devout. Yes, but also hilariously petty and ingeniously weird. These weren't just artisans and priests, they were full-time negotiators, scientists, theologians, and part-time gossip merchants. They traded in purity, but they lived in a system built on bribes, substitutions, and constant negotiation. Cosmas lowers his voice as if sharing the most damning secret. Sometimes, he says, I'd mix just a bit of barley powder into the wax, gives it a little texture, makes it look whiter under the right light. He grins. They never noticed, and that's the truth of it. Sometimes the illusion of perfection was just enough. You step back into the street, carrying with you the smell of wax, the itch of old parchment, and the vague awareness that someone, somewhere, once haggled furiously over a candle's hue to avoid being fined by a bishop with a twitchy nose. The city hums around you, low and sleepy, glowing with imperfect lights, all claiming to be almost, maybe, probably white. You wander deeper into the wax quarter, your sandals catching waxy smudges on the stone that make each step feel slightly stickier than the last. It's the kind of detail you'd ignore in daylight, but now, bathed in the glimmering halo of imperfect candlelight, it feels like part of the dream. You're surrounded by silence, but it's a textured silence, full of the memory of flickering flames and 1,000 whispered arguments about which white is the most sacred. This is the heart of the color wars, not actual wars with swords and shields. Of course, though you wouldn't entirely rule that out. No, these were bureaucratic wars, paper cuts and parchment edits, passive-aggressive guild memoranda, long, dreary council debates, in which grown men debated whether bone white was more divine than cloud white. And someone probably had to be physically removed for calling eggshell heretical. You slip quietly into a candle guild hall, half workshop, half meeting chamber, and entirely absurd. There's a mural on the back wall depicting the 9 shades of sacred light, ranging from divine pearl to sinner's glow. Some of these names, you suspect, were created solely to insult rival wax makers. A heated discussion is underway, not a shouty, table-flipping kind, more the pointed, simmering tension of men who know how to weaponize a raised eyebrow and a muttered, interesting choice. The debate, which hue should be used in the coming feast day at Hagia Sophia. The Archbishop has demanded the purest representation of celestial white, which, naturally, means 12 different workshops have submitted 12 different samples, each claiming divinely inspired provenance. One chandler insists his wax is made from bees that forage only on fig blossoms. Another claims to filter his wax through cloth woven by widowed nuns who fast during full moons. A third simply waves a sample under the nose of the presiding judge and says, "Smell that. That's what Gabriel's wing would smell like." You can't decide whether to laugh or genuflect. A man named Dionysios stands to speak. He's tall, pinched-looking, and has the kind of beard that says, "I drink too much but make excellent wax." He slams down a taper that looks, frankly, like every other taper, and declares, "This is true white, blessed by Bishop Leontios. It burned for 7 hours and 3 minutes, untouched, dripless, clean." The room murmurs. Someone coughs. Then a rival guildmaster, named Basil, of course, it's Basil, leans forward and says, "Yes, but it leans warm. If we use that one, the mosaic halo behind Christ's head will look smudgy." Gasps. A chair scrapes back. And just like that, we are once again knee-deep in Byzantine ecclesiastical design crisis, a very specific kind of meltdown. You observe as the men debate burn rates, hue precision, and theological implications of candle glow. At one point, they argue whether the warmth of light symbolizes divine love or the fires of judgment. One younger man tries to suggest using a lamp instead of a candle and is immediately asked to leave the room for contemplation. Historians still argue whether the final decision for that year's feast was based on actual candle quality or on Basil's connections to the Metropolitan's wine supplier. Some say the winning wax was only chosen because it matched the new ceremonial robes. Others believe there was a secret bribe involving saffron, a white donkey, and a promise not to mention someone's unlicensed fish sauce business. No one really knows. But we do know this. Colors mattered, not just for aesthetics, but for theology. Candles weren't mere light sources. They were symbols of divine presence. Their glow reflected purity. Their shade set the tone for the sacred. If a taper burned too yellow, it might imply decay or corruption. Too blue, and it was considered unnatural, even heretical. True white was elusive, forever sought, never truly found. One surviving text from a chandler's manual includes a passage warning: "Beware the whiteness that is too white, for it may carry frost from below." This has been interpreted in multiple ways, ranging from spiritual warnings to oddly poetic critiques of over-bleached wax. You lean against a wall near a pile of discarded candle stubs, each tagged with notes like "too eager," "slumps in wind," "untrustworthy glow." You wonder what it would be like to be judged so specifically, so unforgivingly by your own light. Then again, weren't the Byzantines judged by everything? Robe color, beard length, the curvature of a bishop's hat, even a dinner guest's plate color could suggest political allegiance. So of course, a candle's hue would trigger full-blown spiritual anxiety. Suddenly, the door creaks open, and a courier rushes in with news. The emperor's court has requested a shipment of thrice-refined, pilgrimage-grade white wax for an emergency midnight mass. You watch chaos unfold as guildmasters scramble to nominate their best blend. A man knocks over a box of wick samples. Someone yells about donkey hair contamination. It's beautiful. It's absurd. It's pure Byzantium. And as you slip back out into the night, the candlelight behind you spills onto the stones like spilled cream, soft and holy, and absolutely 100% not the same shade as the wax 2 shops down. You continue your slow meander through the belly of Byzantine lightcraft, the sound of your footsteps now joined by the faint, rhythmic hum of a merchant sharpening his wax-slicing blade on what looks suspiciously like a piece of broken roof tile. The streets here are quieter, shaded by the overhang of workshops that seem to exhale warm air thick with honey, smoke, and just a hint of singed feathers. You're entering the elite zone now, the part of the city where beeswax envy runs hotter than boiling tallow. This is where the real money lives. Beeswax, unlike tallow, is luxury incarnate. Clean, slow-burning, nearly scentless, and capable of producing the coveted golden white flame that turns shadows in Hagia Sophia into floating halos. But not all beeswax is created equal. Oh no. There are levels, layers, entire hierarchies of wax prestige. You stop at a stall overseen by a merchant named Makarios, who greets you with a grin that says, "I've definitely overcharged a bishop." His display is arranged like a jewelry case, chunks of hardened beeswax labeled by origin: Smyrna, Antioch, Cyzicus, and a rare piece allegedly from an island where bees only pollinate jasmine. You raise an eyebrow. He nods solemnly. They hum in a higher pitch. Historians still argue whether these regional distinctions in wax quality were grounded in any real chemical differences or if this was just the Byzantine version of wine snobbery. Some say Aetolian bees did produce a wax with finer grain and lighter scent. Others insist the whole system was fueled by gossip, bribery, and a very enthusiastic wax-rating monk named Hierotheos. You pick up a piece of wax from Cyprus. It's soft, tacky, and emits a warm aroma, almost floral, with a whisper of lemon. Makarios watches carefully. That one, he whispers, burns with the purity of a saint's last breath. You pretend not to roll your eyes. He pulls out another sample, this one pale yellow, almost translucent, and mutters, "Careful, that's the one that caused the chapel scandal last winter." You lean in. Of course it did. Apparently, a wealthy merchant donated a large batch of refined beeswax to a local abbey, swearing, It had been filtered through marble sieves and blessed by 3 different abbots. The monks lit the candles during a procession, only to discover halfway through the ritual that the wax had been adulterated with stale breadcrumbs. To cut costs, someone had bulked up the beeswax with bakery waste. Half the procession line sneezed from the floating crumbs. One elderly monk reportedly shouted, "I smell sin," and fainted. The merchant claimed innocence. The candles were banned, and the entire lot was burned unceremoniously behind the apse. Macario smirks, still better than tallow. Ah yes, tallow. If beeswax is heavenly, tallow is the smell of despair, rendered from sheep or cow fat. It's cheaper, dirtier, and prone to dribbling like a leaky toddler. It was the wax of necessity, not choice. Poor households used it. Soldiers burned it in bunk barracks. Even monasteries sometimes resorted to it during hard winters, but no one ever bragged about it. There's even a joke still scratched onto a tile near the old ferry docks. "May your candle drip like a sinner's promise." It's an insult. A burn literally and figuratively. And yet, every so often, someone would try to cheat the system, mixing just enough beeswax into tallow to make it passable for middle-class use. You hear the story of a man named Lucas the Lesser, a minor waxman who tried to corner the mid-range candle market by blending waxes in secret. For a while, it worked. He created a passable product. It burned well enough, didn't smell like wet wool, and looked nearly white. He sold hundreds, until, during an evening liturgy, his candles began to weep, literally, drip fat tears. The wax began melting far too fast, and the smell of scorched lamb filled the nave. A priest yelled blasphemy and threw the taper like a javelin. It hit an icon. Lucas vanished from the market the next day. You pass an alley now where failed wax makers displayed discounted candles in bins labeled "Prayer practice only and burn at your own risk." Some are clearly rejects warped, miscolored, or too soft to stand upright. Others might just be misunderstood. You pick one up labeled "Smells like Sunday." It smells like old pine and baked wheat. You can't decide if that's comforting or terrible. Above you, laundry flutters on a line. And for a moment, the entire alley glows with shifting candlelight from the shops, almost like stained glass in motion. It's beautiful, until you realize something. One shop's candles burn slightly faster than the others. You watch closely. Within minutes, the flickering rhythms are out of sync. One store grows dimmer, its candles sagging. The others maintain that luminous glow. And you understand this isn't just art. This is competition. Every taper that underperforms is a dent in a waxmaker's reputation. A flicker too dim, a color too yellow, and your product becomes a punchline. One final stop, a modest stall, tucked behind a curtain. Inside, an old woman in a thick wool shawl is quietly polishing tapers with what appears to be goose feathers. You ask why? To lift the dullness, she whispers. Sometimes wax grows tired. You believe her. And as you leave the stall, candle in hand, the air around you seems warmer. Not just from the fire, but from the weird, obsessive, utterly human drive to make even the smallest light feel perfect. You follow the scent of scorched rosemary and something vaguely medicinal like burnt honey mixed with regret, and it leads you straight to a crumbling courtyard tucked behind the candle district's main alley. A faded mosaic underfoot depicts a saint with 2 fingers raised in blessing, though one is chipped so it looks more like he's asking for silence. It fits, because here, in this quiet corner, whispers once kindled a scandal that would leave soot stains on the empire's reputation. It started, as many Byzantine scandals do, with a smudge. A single streak of black soot, noticed by a bored palace servant during morning prayers at the imperial chapel. It wasn't large, just a faint line on the ceiling above the emperor's designated pew. But it shouldn't have been there. Not if the wax was pure. Not if the wicks had been trimmed properly. Not if the candle had burned as divinely clean as it claimed to be. And so, naturally, this became a matter of state. You arrive just in time to witness the aftermath. 2 monks are being interrogated, and not brutally, just with the kind of relentless, passive-aggressive precision that only Byzantine bureaucracy can deliver. One insists the candles came from a sanctioned batch delivered by the White Glow Guild. The other swears he saw one of the tapers arrive wrapped in an unfamiliar linen, possibly dyed, possibly damp. "You're sure it was damp?" the scribe asks, quill hovering dramatically. The monk shrugs. "Slightly. It had a smell. That's all it takes." The court candlemaster is summoned. He's a wiry man named Petros, known for his white-gloved hands and absolute intolerance for color deviations. He inspects the remaining candles like a surgeon. He sniffs them, snaps one in half, mutters something about density, and then he finds it. The wick is too thick. You might think this is a small detail, but not here. In the world of elite Byzantine waxmaking, wick thickness can determine burn temperature, drip rate, and even the theological appropriateness of a vigil light. A thick wick burns hotter, producing smoke, and smoke means soot. And soot, in the imperial chapel, is heresy in particulate form. Historians still argue whether this particular batch of candles came from a rushed shipment intended for the coronation of a minor noble, or if they were counterfeit products snuck in during a guild strike. Either way, Petros declares them unfit for sacred use, and possibly the result of Frankish interference. You'd think that was a joke. But no, the Byzantines suspected the Franks of many things: bad manners, poor theology, and most damningly, an appalling sense of color balance. They light their prayers in yellow flame. Petros hisses, as if describing a war crime. He calls for a palace inspection. That evening, a squad of scribes, priests, and two unfortunate junior candle boys, barefoot and sweating, conduct a full sweep of the imperial chapel. They check every wall for soot, every candelabra is sniffed, every wax stub catalogued. They find 5 more smudges. This is no longer a nuisance. It's a conspiracy. You find yourself pulled into the drama, standing to the side as a parchment is unrolled, detailing the exact wick specifications for each candle burned within a 3-day window. Notes in the margins reference odd flame behaviors. Drifted left during hymn, spat at bishop, and smelled like apricot unconfirmed. The suspicion begins to turn toward a rival guild, known for pushing the boundaries of candle chemistry. One name keeps surfacing: Ioannikios the Pale. He's a maverick waxman, reclusive, wears only brown, specializes in ultra-refined candle formulas. Rumors swirl that he once filtered his wax through crushed oyster shells to enhance the shimmer. Another time, he allegedly used powdered marble from a ruined temple to brighten the flame. No one knows where he gets his ingredients. Some say he harvests dew from mourning altar cloths. Others claim he boils basilisk scales. You're pretty sure that one's not true, mostly. A few days after the soot incident, a new candle is presented to the court anonymous. Elegant. Pale as milk. It burns without smoke. Clean. Fragrant only if you lean so close you risk singeing your nose hairs. Petros lights it in a test room filled with white marble. Not a single mark, no flicker, no wobble. The flame is still and bright, like a tiny gold coin floating in air. Everyone exhales, but no one can trace the candle's maker. It was delivered in a linen pouch with no seal, no markings, no price tag, just a folded piece of parchment with one word in Latin: candela, which is just the word for candle, a message, a warning, a marketing stunt. No one knows, but the soot conspiracy fades away. The previous wax is quietly removed. The scandal hushed. Guild meetings resume. Petros returns to his private workshop, still muttering about wick geometry. And you step back into the cool air, where the scent of beeswax lingers and the flame from a nearby lantern burns steady, pale, and utterly innocent, at least on the surface, because in Byzantium, even light casts shadows. You wake slowly from the candle-scented haze, only to realize you never really left, because now you're seated cross-legged on a woven mat in the back of a workshop where the Byzantine wick obsession is reaching full, fiery climax. In this room, no wax is poured, no molds are filled. This is the wick room, and it smells like singed linen and pride. A young apprentice is hunched over a spindle, carefully twisting strands of flax thread into a delicate helix. Each rotation is deliberate, almost reverent. The goal: to achieve the perfect twist, not too loose, which produces a feeble flame, not too tight, which burns too fast and soots everything like an angry chimney. This, you learn, is no small matter. The Byzantine elite believed that the wick, that tiny, seemingly insignificant strand, was the very soul of a candle. The wax might give body, but the wick gave it life. And so, naturally, things got a little obsessive. One master chandler, a broad-shouldered man named Isidoros, explains the four great wick traditions: the single spiral, ideal for incense-heavy rooms; the double twist, beloved by court officials because it resisted breezes from sycophantic booing; the cross braid, rumored to produce a more orthodox flicker; and the silent knot, a fringe design often dismissed as too Protestant, despite existing centuries before Protestantism. You suppress a laugh. Isidoros hands you a burnt-out candle stub from last week's test. He splits it open like a stale loaf of bread and shows you the wick's inner char. "See that gray line?" he asks. "Too much olive in the spin." She curled in on herself. You nod sagely. You have no idea what that means. Historians still argue whether these wick varieties made any practical difference or if it was all waxmaker folklore passed down like sacred recipes. Some experimental reenactors, yes, that's a real thing, have tried recreating Byzantine wicks using linen soaked in salt water, vinegar, and, bizarrely, boiled beetroot. Results were mixed. One reenactor's workshop allegedly caught fire when his silent knot candles refused to extinguish. You move to a table where bundles of raw flax are being combed. A young woman named Thecla plucks a strand and threads it with the speed and certainty of someone who's done this 20,000 times. "You know," she says, not looking up. "They used to say wick shape affected prayer clarity." You raise an eyebrow. She smiles. Not the words, just how high the prayers went. Apparently, a straight wick yields direct prayers. Twisted wick, oddly more meditative. Cross braid, that's for collective prayers. And the silent knot, dangerous. Sometimes the prayers came back. You're not sure whether she's joking. Thecla points to a parchment pinned on the wall. An illustration of flame behaviors, the devout flicker, the wavering doubt, the chalice curl, each one connected to specific wick faults. She's not making this up. There are actual reports from monastic candle testers who documented flame moods like mystics on a tea break. You trail behind Isidoros as he leads you to the testing alcove. A stone-walled room with no windows, only a dozen candle brackets, each spaced evenly apart. Here, new wicks are tested under controlled devotional conditions. That means singing, fasting, and no cheese the night before. Inside, candles burn silently, some tall, some stubby, some with flames that stand like proud soldiers. Others bend and dance as though listening to an invisible tune. Isidoros watches them like a father judging his children's school play performances. He gestures toward one that burns so steadily it seems frozen in time. Double twist, cypress oil stiffening, perfect for psalm recitation. Won't stutter through the Gloria. You begin to understand just how deep the obsession runs. These aren't just materials, they're personalities. Each candle is a collaborator in the ritual. The wick isn't merely a conduit for flame, it's a statement of intent. One case from a court record tells of a bishop refusing to anoint a royal cousin because the baptismal candles burned with a leftward lean. "Unstable wicks," he said. "Unstable soul." The family was furious. The waxmaker was fined. The candles were melted down and repurposed as plague ward tapers, which, honestly, seems harsh. And yet somehow it makes sense here. You sit quietly in the corner of the testing alcove, watching one flame twitch slightly to the right. Thecla leans over and mutters, "That one's been watching us since we lit it." You stare a moment longer than you should. When you finally return to the main workshop, the tables are now covered in wick prototypes, bundles soaked in everything from mint tea to ox bile. Apparently, someone had heard that mint-scented wicks calmed livestock during outdoor sermons. Another wick, braided with horsehair, is said to produce a flame so thin it whispers. That's the word they use, whispers. And as night deepens, you realize that everything in this world is filtered through a single lens. How the light behaves, not just that it shines, but how it moves. Flickers, listens, responds. The Byzantines didn't just burn candles, they communed with them. You take one last look at the perfect flame in the alcove, still burning, still straight, still whispering. You find yourself drifting out of the wick room and into what the locals only half-jokingly call the Whitener's dungeon. It's not a dungeon in the chain-rattling, scream-filled sense. No, it's worse. It's a low, windowless chamber where candlemakers spend their days performing one of the most punishing tasks in all of Byzantium, bleaching beeswax. The room is lined with tables coated in pale residue and stacked trays of wax slabs, each resting under gauzy linen soaked in mysterious solutions. A young assistant, barefoot and wild-eyed, from too many hours breathing vinegar fumes, grins at you and mutters, "Careful, the fumes get inside your ideas." You take half a step back. This is where the true, almost white magic happens. The artisans here don't mold or pour or spin wicks. Their job is singular, to push beeswax as close as possible to the divine threshold of whiteness, without tipping it into brittle uselessness or, worse, false brightness. The overseer of the dungeon is a squat man named Menas. He wears leather gloves and an expression that could curdle milk. "You want holy light," he says without looking at you. "Then you need wax that's been humbled." And humbled it is. The process, Menas explains, is part chemistry, part patience, part theology. The wax is first melted down and filtered through cloth bags, once linen, now often made from repurposed priest vestments, said to carry latent sanctity. Then, the wax is poured into flat molds and laid out in rows like pale loaves of bread, ready to be washed repeatedly with lemon water, ashy paste, or fermented milk. Some even use snow melt, collected from the mountaintops of Bithynia, believed to carry sky-cleansing energy. Of course, snow doesn't fall often in Constantinople, so there's a black market snow melt trade. One merchant was caught shipping frozen goat skins lined with ice, claiming it was summit-born dew. It was just rainwater. He was banned from selling candles for 5 years. Mina scoffs. Everyone wants a shortcut. But there is no shortcut to sacred. He walks you over to a corner where slabs of wax are being dried over smoldering embers. That's wormwood smoke. He says, not for scent, for shame. It draws out the bitterness. You want your wax to feel like repentance before it ever touches a wick. You try not to cough. Historians still argue whether any of this actually affected wax color, or if it was just ritualized labor, an ancient equivalent of, "This is how we've always done it." One theory suggests the long bleaching process was more psychological than chemical. By the time the candle was finished, everyone involved believed it was holy. There's even a fringe interpretation among scholars that suggests bleached wax was intentionally left imperfect, to remind worshippers that divine light can come from even the most flawed material. That theory isn't popular with guild accountants. You pass a table where an apprentice is painting wax samples onto tiles. He's comparing their tones under lamplight pearl fog, saint's breath, ascetic eggshell, each name more pretentious than the last. You glance at the tiles and honestly, they all look nearly the same. That's when Menas taps your shoulder. "You're missing the point," he says. "It's not the color alone. It's how it glows." He dims the lamps. One candle is lit. It burns with a soft, unwavering flame that glows not white, not yellow, but something in between. Cream shot through with gold. Light that makes your bones feel older. That candle was bleached for 3 months and filtered through 7 layers of silk cloth dyed with crushed lily petals. Minos nods toward it. That one forgives. You're not sure what he means, but you don't ask. Further in the room, another artisan older, twitchier, whispers that there's a secret 5th stage of whitening, known only to a few masters. It involves the wax being buried in sand and left under moonlight for 40 nights. But not just any moonlight, he says. Full moons only, and only during the fasts. You look around, waiting for someone to laugh. No one does. A parchment on the wall shows an old diagram, 8 rings of color arranged in a circle, like some wax-based zodiac. In the center, a single drop of wax labeled Lux Candida, or the white light. Every chandler wants to reach it. None admit when they fail. One final table. Here, rejected waxes stacked in sad little towers, labeled too yellow, clouded, melted during Lent. You run your fingers along one piece that seems perfectly fine. But when you hold it to the light, there's a strange shadow inside, like a memory that got stuck. Minos appears again. That one burned too fast. Looked right, felt wrong. And maybe that's the lesson down here in the Whitener's dungeon. Perfection isn't always visible. it has to be felt. These candle makers aren't just chasing brightness, they're crafting emotional wavelengths, sacred geometry in flame. As you leave, the young apprentice calls after you, smiling with ash on his teeth. Don't trust the white that doesn't flicker. You nod, though you're not sure you understand. Outside, the street feels colder, darker, but somehow cleaner, because now you know what's behind the glow. You emerge from the bleaching dungeon blinking like you've been reborn. Which, in the Byzantine candle world, you sort of have. You're not just some wanderer anymore. You're an initiate, a novice in the cult of flicker and hue, and your next stop, naturally, is the most sacred space of all, the Candle Archive. It's less glamorous than it sounds. The Candle Archive lives in a crooked annex behind a crumbling chapel, guarded by a sleepy cat, and a door that creaks like it's narrating its own death. Inside, the air is thick with old wax dust and the papery hush of forgotten obsession. Shelves sag under the weight of parchment scrolls, wax samples, burnt wicks tied with thread, and entire ledgers devoted solely to candle audits. Yes, candle audits. You tiptoe past a wooden table where a monk is cataloging candle remains from a coronation that happened 3 emperors ago. He holds up a melted stub with reverence, then notes, lean citrus, wick, grain, inconsistent, glow rating, modest. This is where the burn records live, detailed logs of who lit what, when, where, for how long, and get this why. Each candle had a purpose. And here, every one of those purposes is cross-referenced, annotated, and indexed by at least 3 categories. One parchment you stumble across reads, Feast of Saint Theodore, Year of Desor, of the Comet, 6 tapers bleached, 4 vigil candles unbleached, 2 hope lights, emergency redip following wax theft, 5 penitential stubs drip aloud, all accounted, flame quality, sorrowful, but sincere. You can't make this stuff up, except someone did. Historians still argue whether the more poetic candle entries were real observations or just devotional exaggerations added by particularly moody monks. Some claim there was an archivist named Andreas who insisted that flame temperament was measurable and created an entire classification system: brooding, exultant, contrite, flirtatious, and his favorite imperial melancholy. You reach a drawer labeled inadmissibles. Inside are candles that were refused, deemed unsuitable for sacred use. Some have foreign wicks. Others are the wrong hue or smell faintly of fish, never a good sign. One bundle is marked, whitened with chalk dust, burned angry. Another simply says, flame hissed. No further comment. You hold one up to the light. It's almost beautiful pearl gray, with a gentle marbling like the inside of an old shell. You can't see anything wrong with it, but apparently, it failed a very specific test. Maybe it burned too fast. Maybe it flickered during a sacred silence. Maybe it whispered something unrepeatable. We'll never know. In a dusty corner sits a row of sealed boxes labeled by decade. You open one at random and find candle remains from a funeral mass. Each stub has a tag: left of altar, second tier of choir stall, unlit, blown out by draft. Someone had even measured the angle at which each flame had tilted. You blink. These people were intense. And yet, it all makes sense. In Byzantium, light was theology. It wasn't enough to illuminate the space, it had to reflect the moment, the emotion, the prayer. Every flicker was interpreted. Every drip was suspect. A candle didn't just burn, it spoke. You pause at a wall where wax samples have been pressed onto parchment literal color swatches. They range from pale wheat to near ivory, some labeled with hopeful names like Anointed Glow and Snow in Lent. Others are less inspiring: Winter Fat, Ashen Nudge, Pre-Famine Tone. Beneath the swatches, someone has scribbled a note: Perfection is a lie whispered by candles that never flicker. You believe it. As you move through the archive, you begin to notice another pattern: the silence. It's not just quiet, it's reverent. No one speaks above a whisper. The candle logs aren't just records, they're relics. And each entry feels like a window into someone's hopes, someone's fear, someone's long-ago night where the flame burned just right or didn't. You stumble upon a ledger sealed with wax and break it open. Inside is a personal journal of a master chandler named Simeon, who worked exclusively for the imperial household. His notes are obsessive. The Empress prefers a rose-laced undertone, subtle. Last year's batch burned too assertive. Imperial baptism candle, trimmed 3 times. Flame shimmered. Archbishop nodded. Confession. Vigil. Light. Burned crooked. Perhaps prophetic. His final entry reads simply, wax is forgiving. Wicks are not. You close the book. And in that moment, you realize that in this city, where gold mosaics gleam and incense curls through marble domes, the truest record of its soul may just be in these quiet, dusty archives, not in battle scrolls, not in palace decrees, but in the stories of small flames born, burned, and remembered. You leave the archive slower, as if afraid to disturb the memory of light. The door creaks behind you, but you swear it's gentler now. Outside, the sun is setting, and for a moment, the whole city glows like a candle left too close to the divine. Night falls like ink over Constantinople. And now you move through the city guided not by the sun, but by 1,000 tiny flames. From imperial chapels to alleyway shrines, each candle glows with quiet authority. You stop outside a tavern where a fat, greasy tallow candle sputters like a drunk hiccuping in Latin. The owner sees you eyeing it and shrugs. It was cheap. And there it is, the ancient tension between form and function. But tonight, you're not here for tavern flickers. You're headed somewhere holier and stranger. You're going to the monastic flame trials, held once a month by the Brotherhood of the Glorious Wick. Yes, they name themselves that. With zero irony, these trials are equal parts spiritual devotion and low-stakes pageantry. In the courtyard of a cliffside monastery, under the watchful stares of robed judges and 3 extremely bored-looking goats, a handful of monks test their newest candle batches against divine standards of flame behavior. You take a seat on a stone bench beside an old nun selling candied figs and pre-blessed wicks. The first monk steps forward. He's small, nervous, holding a squat candle wrapped in purple linen. He places it in the center ring and lights it with a flint spark. The flame ignites, curls upward, then leans hard to the left. The judges murmur, "That's a drift." One says, "Unacceptable in fasting conditions." The monk bows his head. Someone rings a small bell. The candle is extinguished. Next comes a younger novice with trembling hands and a tall, bone-white taper. This one lights clean, no flicker. The flame dances perfectly, casting an even glow. The judges nod approvingly until a drop of wax spills onto the stone and hisses. "Oh dear," says the nun beside you. "That one's weeping. She's not being poetic." In candle trials, a hiss is considered a flame sob, often interpreted as unresolved spiritual tension in the wax's journey. Historians still argue whether this belief was born from actual burn patterns or just a poetic monk with a flair for drama. Either way, that candle fails. Then comes a wizened monk named Father Gerasimos, known in whispered legend as the Wick Whisperer. His candle is tiny, no longer than a finger, and it's wrapped in humble linen. When he lights it, the flame flares, then settles. It neither flickers nor bends. It glows. But here's the miracle. The air around it stills. The wind holds its breath. Even the goats stop chewing. One judge removes his hood. Balanced, he says. This one listens. And that, you discover, is the highest praise in the trials. Flames that listen. Gerasimos bows and leaves without a word. His candle is allowed to burn until it dies naturally. No one touches it. You sit and watch, mesmerized, as the wax pool grows slowly, silently, like the world's gentlest heartbeat. Later, in the monastery's scriptorium, you flip through records of past trials. One entry reads, "Candle submitted by Brother Lucas. Flame leaned eastward throughout Psalm 88. Wind minimal. Possible omen. Candle of Sister Markella. Burned too brightly. Deemed prideful. Taper of Brother John. Flickered in rhythm with chanting. Flame judged inspired." If slightly theatrical, there's something beautiful in how seriously they take it. Not as performance, but as translation, as though the candle is speaking in light, and they're trying to interpret its sacred syllables. One monk tells you they sometimes use candles to settle disputes. How does that work? You ask. He explains, 2 candles, made by opposing parties, are lit side by side. Whichever burns steady longest is said to be closer to the divine. It's not foolproof, he admits, but it's better than shouting. You chuckle until he adds, it once prevented a schism. Fair enough. Before you leave, the nun offers you a trial candle of your own. It's short, rough, pale as bone. She winks. This one's honest. Won't flatter you. You light it on a wall sconce near the monastery gate. The flame is small but stubborn. It leans slightly west, then straightens, then leans again. You watch it. Curious. Is it uncertain? Curious. Or just responding to your breath? You'll never know. But as you walk away, you keep glancing back at it, expecting it to do something. It doesn't. It just burns. And somehow, that's enough. Because in this world of holy wax and whispered wicks, sometimes the greatest miracle is a flame that doesn't try too hard. You descend from the monastery at dawn, the city below still swaddled in the slow glow of 1,000 guttering tapers. The streets are quieter now, hushed by exhaustion and the faint smell of burned tallow that clings to everything like regret. And as you return to the waxmaker's district, you begin to notice a change in tone. This isn't the sparkle of ritual light anymore. This is the world of candle politics. Yes, you heard that right. In Byzantium, even flame had factions. You find yourself at the edge of a small plaza where 2 rival candle guilds, the White Glow Guild and the Sacred Flame Consortium, have set up opposing market stalls. Their banners flutter dramatically, each claiming superiority in vague poetic terms like true luminescence and light born of piety. A boy walks between them selling figs and impartial wick samples. A White Glow member, a tall woman with a wax-stained apron and an expression like boiled leather, leans over and hisses, "Their candles lean. I've seen it. A full half-degree." The rival vendor, not missing a beat, yells back, "At least ours ignite," without muttering. You step carefully between them. This is a cold war of wax. Historians still argue whether these guild rivalries were purely economic or if there was genuine theological beef involved. Some records suggest that certain guilds accused others of mixing in secular oils like walnut or linseed to stretch their beeswax. This, of course, was heresy adjacent. One dramatic account tells of a guildmaster excommunicated for moral dullness in the taper. Guild politics weren't just about purity. They were about control. The White Glow Guild, for example, held exclusive rights to produce candles for 3 major feast days, including Pentecost. The Sacred Flame Consortium had contracts with several monasteries and boasted a secret wick-twisting technique they claimed was inspired by the angel's breath. You suspect marketing was involved. At the center of the plaza sits a comparison altar, a small marble platform where curious buyers can light 1 candle from each guild and see the results for themselves. You decide to give it a try. You're handed 2 tapers. The White Glow candle lights instantly, burns clean, emits no smell. Its flame is modest but steady, like a well-behaved choir boy. The Sacred Flame candle takes a moment longer to catch, but once it does, the flame dances with the golden hue, throwing warm shadows like a baritone humming a hymn. Someone beside you whispers, "That one feels holier." You're starting to understand that in this city, holy isn't a fixed measurement. It's about performance. A candle that looks sacred, smells sacred, and most importantly, burns sacred is holy, and holiness can be engineered. You speak to a scribe assigned to monitor the guild trials. He shows you a scroll labeled Flame Disputes, 3rd quarter. One entry reads, "Complaint filed. White Glow taper leaned during baptism. Alleged sabotage. Wick suspected of being over-oiled. Ruling. Inconclusive. Candle confiscated. Infant reportedly unaffected. Fine issued. 1 dram of wax and a public apology." Another entry simply says, "Candle hissed during sermon. Priest offended. Guild denies hiss." But of course, the real drama unfolds behind closed doors. You hear whispers of a candle espionage apprentices bribed to slip extra tallow into competitor molds. Sacred dyes switched with inferior batches. Wick recipes copied and modified with just enough difference to avoid confession. One legendary tale tells of a man named Stephanos the Subtle, who infiltrated 3 different guilds over a decade, learning each of their techniques. When discovered, he fled to the countryside, where he allegedly began producing flameless vigil tapers, candles that glowed without burning, likely using crushed mica and bioluminescent oil. No one has seen one since. But the rumor alone was enough to keep the guilds paranoid for years. You move to a quieter corner of the plaza, where a small, unaffiliated vendor sells what he calls neutral candles. They're simple. No branding, no slogans, just honest wax and a humble wick. You light one. It flickers a little, leans, but not dramatically. Drips, but only once. It smells faintly of smoke and sun-dried cloth. You ask the man why he doesn't join a guild. They care about color. He says, I care about light. You smile. He shrugs. Besides, guilds never agree on what white actually is. And there it is, the core of the debate. The color, almost white. Was it ivory, bone, cloud, parchment, blessed snow? Each guild defined it differently. One scholar even suggested the Byzantines had 7 words for white, depending on religious context, lighting, and time of year. No wonder they fought. As the sun rises higher, the plaza fills with more buyers, priests, cooks, soldiers. Everyone needs light, but not everyone agrees on what it should look like, smell like, feel like. You walk away with 3 candles in your bag, each claiming to be the truest. And as you glance back one last time, the 2 rival banners catch the breeze and flap together for a brief, flickering moment. One almost white, one whiter, just enough to disagree. You wander now through the upper city, past spice stalls and sandal makers and street poets arguing with pigeons. Tucked behind a curtain of cypress trees, you discover a tiny, ivy-covered house. No sign, no shopfront, just the soft glow of candlelight through a slatted window and a scent sweet, clean, vaguely floral, like rain evaporating off old stone. You knock. This is the home of Irene, the most elusive candlemaker in Constantinople. No guild claims her, no monastery contracts her. But her candles, they appear at every royal funeral, every vigil for a fallen saint, and always without explanation. They're passed hand to hand, whispered about, traded like relics. Some call them ghost lights. Others insist they sing, though no one can quite agree on what that means. Irene opens the door slowly. She's older than you expected, stooped, sharp-eyed, with wax in the folds of her robe and soot in the lines of her palms. She studies you for a long moment, then steps aside. You enter a room bathed in warmth, not heat warmth. There's a difference. It feels like stepping into a lullaby. Candles line every shelf, some lit, some cooling, none labeled, and not one is the same color. These are all almost white, Irene says. She gestures to one pail with a bluish cast. That one's from olive oil, ash, and sheep's milk vinegar. Another glows with a faint pink undertone, filtered through rose water and linen buried during Lent. A third is nearly translucent. That one listened to prayers while it cooled. You blink. Wait, listened. She gives you a crooked smile. Wax remembers what it hears. Not forever, but for a while. You wonder if she's teasing. You wonder if it matters. Irene doesn't use scrolls, doesn't write recipes. She measures by memory and instinct. Her workshop is full of odd ingredients: crushed pearl, dried chamomile, scorched parchment, even a jar labeled simply tears. Historians still argue whether Irene was real or just a folk figure, a stand-in for the anonymous women who labored outside the guild system, crafting votive lights for grief rituals and hidden shrines. Some say she once trained under the court candlemaster before abandoning formulas altogether. Others claim she was blind and identified good wax by touch alone. You know what you see? A woman stirring a pot of wax with a spoon carved from driftwood, humming under her breath. On her wall is a faded tapestry depicting a single flame surrounded by concentric rings of thread white, cream, gray, silver, gold. You ask what it means. Emotion, she says. Each ring is a layer of feeling the flame can carry. You sit with her for a while, just watching. At one point, she dips her fingers into warm wax, lets it cool, peels it away like a second skin. This is how I test memory, she murmurs. If the wax forgets too quickly, it won't glow with kindness. That's not in any guild manual. She lets you light one of her candles. It's pale gold in the light, but once lit, the flame takes on a shifting hue white. Then ivory. Then something close to moonlight on wet stone. You feel something strange in your chest. Not off exactly, not sadness either. Something remembered. Irene watches your face. That one knew grief. You don't ask how she knows. You just nod. She hands you a stub of wax wrapped in linen. Don't light this one. It's for keeping. For what? You ask. For when you need to hold something without speaking it. She says it like she is handing you a secret. You realize her candles aren't made for ceremony or show. They're made for moments that don't have language. For vigil nights where silence is the only prayer. For grief that doesn't end, only shifts. For memory and mercy, and flickers too small for anyone else to see. Before you leave, she presses a soft white taper into your hand. This one forgives slowly. She says, let it, and then you're out again. Back in the bustle, clutching wax that feels heavier than it should. You pass a group of guild apprentices arguing over soot ratios. You don't stop. You pass a chapel lighting standardized candles. You don't go in. You just keep walking. One taper wrapped in linen, one unlit and waiting. And both now part of a story no record will ever write down. Because some flames aren't meant to illuminate, they're meant to remember. You find yourself wandering down a narrow lane lined with closed shutters and cracked frescoes, where the silence feels denser than the air. This is not a part of the city marked on any map. No tour guides pass through here, but every once in a while, if you're quiet, if your steps are soft, you catch sight of a flame in a window, barely more than a glimmer. This is where the secret votives live, not the public candles of chapels or the ceremonial tapers of palace rites. These are private flames the confession lights, the heartbreak wicks, the apology tapers, candles meant to burn in solitude, to bear witness to things no priest can fix and no record can redeem. You approach a small shrine built into the wall between two crumbling houses. It's no larger than a suitcase. Inside it, a single wax stub burns low beside a rough icon of a saint, whose face has long since peeled away. There's no plaque, no inscription, just a candle burning with deep intention. You stand and watch it for a long time. It flutters, it sighs, it stays. Eventually, an old man emerges from the shadows and tells you, not unkindly, that one's been lit every day for 16 years, sometimes longer. For what? You ask. For letting go. You realize these lights aren't lit to attract attention. They're lit to release something. Some carry memories too sharp for words. Others are apologies never delivered. One is labeled with a scrap of parchment that simply reads, "Still sorry." Historians still argue whether these votives represented a formal category of ritual or whether they simply emerged from folk habit. There's no central authority governing them. No guild makes money off them. And yet, they appear everywhere at crossroads, in garden walls, behind market stalls. Some scholars refer to them as the shadow liturgy. One document from a forgotten scribe mentions a woman who lit a candle every day for her son lost in the sea. She changed the wax blend with the season spring for hope, winter for grief. When she died, the neighbors kept lighting it. No one knows why, but they still do. You slip into a tucked-away alley where a tiny chapel crouches under the overhang of an abandoned bathhouse. Its door creaks open, and inside you find something remarkable. The wall of wicks. It's exactly what it sounds like. A wall covered in short, unburned wicks, pinned like offerings. Each is labeled in a hand barely legible. Names, dates, sometimes single words, forgiveness, sleep, pizza. Don't forget. Her laugh. You brush your fingers near them and feel something not warm, not cold, just present. A priest steps out of the shadows. He's old, but his eyes are clear. He tells you the wicks are never burned. They're promises. He says, if you light them, they turn to memory too quickly. Sometimes it's better to just let the promise exist. You nod. He offers you a wick, blank, soft, frayed at the end like it's waiting for something. Add it when you're ready. He says, or don't. Not every candle needs to burn. You walk through the chapel. No benches, just light. Candles line the walls in silent vigil. Some lean, some cry wax tears. One burns with a tiny curl of black smoke, but no one moves to replace it. This place doesn't believe in perfection. It believes in presence. You light a candle. You don't know why exactly. You just do. It's a short taper, probably homemade. The flame takes a second to catch, then rises, unsure at first, then steady. You feel it settle. Later, you climb onto the roof of a nearby building and watch the city from above. Dozens, hundreds of these votive lights wink from hidden corners. They're not uniform. They're not coordinated. But together, they make the city glow like a constellation of unspoken things. You think of Irene's workshop. You think of the monastery trials, the angry guilds, the perfect whites, the candles that forgave, and the ones that hissed, and you realize that these votives imperfect, unsanctioned, half-burned, wholly human might be the truest candles of all. You descend the roof slower than you climbed it, as if afraid of scattering the quiet. Back on the ground, you pass a shrine where a child lights a stubby wax curl with her mother's help. It flares, flickers, then settles into a crooked glow. The girl smiles, and you do too. It's the middle of the night now, and the city of Constantinople has shifted into its quietest form, a hushed sprawl of ancient stone and weary breath, where only the flickering lights seem to be awake. You walk slowly, like your feet are made of cooled wax, through a narrow archway, and into the one place you haven't yet dared to go, the candle burial grounds. Yes, they exist, and no, they are not a joke. This is where candles go to die, nestled behind a forgotten convent and bordered by fig trees twisted from too much wind. The burial grounds are a series of sunken courtyards filled with sand and broken marble. At first glance, it looks like a ruin. But then, you notice the small wax stubs, hundreds of them partially buried. Some upright, some melted into the stone like memory fossils. A caretaker appears. Of course she does. Her name is Mother Ligia, and she speaks with a voice like brittle paper. These are the spent, she says, gesturing to the scattered remains, too sacred to toss, too broken to use. You kneel beside a candle stump embedded in the dirt. It's pale. The wick burned all the way down. Someone has scratched a word into the wax? Almost. Mother Ligia explains. Some of these candles burned in failed ceremonies. Some were doused mid-prayer. Others were declared unworthy during flame trials. But the wax itself wasn't guilty. We bury them, she says, because we believe the light tried. Historians still argue whether this practice was symbolic or literal. No formal records exist. And yet, oral tradition across the city speaks of these candle graves, the silence yards, wax gardens, resting flames. One modern scholar even proposed that they were metaphors invented later by poets. They weren't, you're here, you see it. There are rules in the burial grounds. You do not relight anything. You do not retrieve wax. You do not speak above a whisper. The grounds are watched over by a few nuns and a great horned owl named Damianos, who perches on a crumbling archway like a very judgmental gargoyle. You follow Ligia into a smaller enclosure where the candles are older. Stranger, this section is for the interrupted, she says. Interrupted candles are those whose flames were extinguished without ritual, sudden gusts of wind, accidental touches, fear. They are said to carry unresolved energy. Some even believe they must be reburied multiple times to find rest. One grave is marked only with the word mercy carved into a broken taper. Another reads, didn't finish. Ligia tells you of a candle lit during a wedding that blew out the moment the vows began. The marriage didn't last a week. The candle was later buried here with a piece of the bridal veil wrapped around it. You nod. You don't know what else to do. She leads you to a trough filled with bits of melted wax from various ceremonies. This is the common memory, she says. Every few months, we melt them all together and make one candle. You raise an eyebrow. One, she smiles. A Thranos candle. It burns for grief shared by many. Apparently, these candles are never sold or gifted. They're placed silently in public places near plague hospitals, at battle memorials, outside debt courts. They burn slow, smell faintly of ash and lavender, and if they hiss, no one mentions it. You ask if you can light one. Mother Ligia hands you a stub from her apron pocket. It's pale, a little cracked. This one came from a failed coronation, she says, but it never meant harm. You light it. The flame stutters, then steadies, a bit crooked, a bit tired. but it burns. Ligia leans in. Some light is not for beauty. It's for continuing. You watch it for a long while. In one corner of the burial grounds is a broken column where melted wax has pooled into layers over centuries. Some call it the wax tree, though it doesn't grow. It's just there, thick with the weight of discarded intention. You run your hand along it and feel a warmth not of temperature, but of memory. So many beginnings, so many almosts, before you leave. Ligia presses a vial into your hand. It's filled with melted wax shavings from dozens of burial stubs. Add it to your own. She says, let them burn with you. They've earned it. As you step through the gate and out into the sleeping city, your heart feels heavy but not sad. Because now you understand something few others do. Even the failed lights still mattered. You walk through the city one last time, your steps slow, like candlelight stretched across a quiet stone floor. Constantinople breathes beneath you, still and weighty, its windows full of sleeping embers and prayers that flicker without words. The wind carries a faint hint of beeswax and memory. Somewhere behind you, a bell tolls not for alarm, but for presence, for keeping time with flame. You make your way to the lighthouse chapel, the tallest structure in the entire city devoted solely to light. It isn't on most maps. It leans slightly. Its roof is caved in places, but every night, it shines. Inside, there are no pews, just a spiraling ramp, winding around a hollow center where hundreds of candles burn in tiers. The effect is overwhelming, not just brightness, but depth. The flames aren't identical. Some are tall, confident. Others are stubby, cracked, even tilted. Some burn blue, some white, some a kind of ghostly gold. But they burn. You move slowly up the ramp. With every level, a story emerges. A plaque beside one candle reads, "For the child who never woke." Another, "Lit on the night the sea swallowed everything." Another has no words, just a wax figure, curled like a sleeping cat. At the top of the spiral, you reach the keeper's alcove. The woman who tends the lighthouse chapel is called Photine. She sits cross-legged on a cushion, surrounded by candle shards and wick spools. She doesn't greet you. She simply says, "Do you have something to leave?" You hesitate. Then you reach into your bag and take out the taper from Irene, the one that forgives slowly. You hold it in your palm, its linen wrap soft from handling. You walk it to the small stone pedestal in the center of the alcove and set it there. Photine nods. You light it. The flame catches with surprising ease. It flickers, curls, then rises into a slow, steady burn. It glows not with brilliance, but with resolve, not showy, not dramatic, but it stays. You sit and watch, and in that moment, every strange encounter, the monastery trials, the wax bleaching rituals, the rival guild arguments, the secret votives, the burial grounds, the flickering silences pulls into focus. This city didn't worship flame because it needed light. It listened to it because it needed meaning. The color almost white never meant absence. It meant possibility. A space where light can be holy, imperfect, stubborn, small, tired, glorious, uncertain, faithful, and real. Historians still argue whether any of it mattered. Whether the flame that leaned in Psalm 88 meant anything. Whether candles heard confessions. Whether wax remembered grief. But you've been here. You've seen what they won't write in textbooks. You know it mattered. Eventually, Photine speaks again. That one will burn until the sun touches it. You nod. You don't need to know what that means. You descend the spiral in silence, the light warming your back. You pass candles burning for lovers lost, soldiers forgotten, dogs remembered, cities rebuilt. None are perfect. All are present. You step into the night. The stars above shimmer. Faint and old, the city sighs. Someone lights a taper behind a window, and just like that, you're ready to sleep. The candles burn behind you, now distant, like the faint hum of a lullaby you once knew by heart. You walk slower now. The stones beneath your feet feel worn but kind. You pass alleyways where soft light spills out like dreams exhaled through shutters. A whisper of wax lingers in the air, sweet, earthy, warm. Even the arguments over color and purity seem soft-edged now, like stories you heard as a child and only half believed. You don't remember the names, just the glow, just the silence that came after. The city is asleep. But the light never sleeps. It flickers through the dark, not to chase it away, but to remind it you're not alone. And that's what it's always been, hasn't it? Not brilliance, not clarity, not perfection, but something gentler, a warmth that holds you long enough to exhale. You stop near a fountain, sit on the edge, you don't need to move again for a while. The candle from your hand. Your story still glows somewhere up in the lighthouse chapel. You don't need to see it. You just need to know. And you do. So let your breath slow. Let your eyelids lower. Let the flicker inside you soften, dim, but never fully go out. Because somewhere in a quiet room, a small flame still burns, almost white,